Imagine a morning at NATO headquarters at the height of the Cold War. Fresh, grainy photographs from the latest Soviet parade on Red Square lie on intelligence analysts' desks, and their faces turn pale. While Western politicians delivered speeches about peace, the Soviet industry rolled out something onto the pavement that made NATO generals wake up in a cold sweat. It was the T-10, 50 tons of pure aggression and cast armor. Western experts feverishly counting the steel columns credited the Soviet Union with an incredible armada of 8,000 such machines. In their imagination, these monsters were capable of shattering any defense with a single crushing blow and reaching the English Channel in a matter of days. Where did this last heavy tank of the great empire come from, and why did the mere mention of it make the enemy tremble? Today we will break down the story of the machine that was meant to be the USSR's main argument in a Third World War that never happened. In the late 40s, the Soviet command realized that tanks from the World War II era were rapidly becoming obsolete. The Cold War demanded a machine superior to anything created before. However, an unexpected barrier arose on the path to the ideal heavyweight: the ambitions of the engineers. The main contender for the master of the fields was the IS-7, a true steel monster weighing nearly 70 tons. It was a tank with incredible armor and firepower, but the military assessed the situation soberly. The country's roads and bridges simply could not support such a giant, and the production process itself was too complex for mass series. The army didn't need a unique super tank, they needed a universal machine. Therefore, the main armored directorate gave a clear task to the designers of the Chelyabinsk plant: create a tank whose weight strictly does not exceed 50 tons. The design was based on components from the IS-4, the protection system from the IS-3, and the best developments from the IS-7 project. The new machine was assigned the index IS-5 and the working title Object 730. Creating this tank became a complex game of chess between two of the USSR's industrial giants. Even though Chelyabinsk received the order, the task of leading the project was entrusted to Joseph Kotin, the chief designer of the Leningrad Kirov plant. This decision was not accidental. It was necessary to combine the massive production base of Chelyabinsk with the best engineering minds of Leningrad. To speed up the process, more than 40 leading specialists from the Leningrad branch of Experimental Plant No. 100 were urgently transferred to Chelyabinsk. Thanks to this deployment and the use of existing components, work progressed at an incredible speed. Only a few months later, in April 1949, the preliminary design of the future legend was complete. The tank that would make NATO wake up in a cold sweat began to take its real shape. By May 1949, the project moved from drawings into 3 dimensions. A full-scale wooden mock-up was built in the workshops for a strict joint commission. The military officials didn't just look from the sidelines, they literally crawled all over the model, checking the ergonomics of the crew stations and access to the mechanisms. The commission had surprisingly few criticisms. Within a month, the bulk of the blueprints entered production. While Chelyabinsk prepared the machinery, Leningrad engineers conducted bench tests on individual components. The plan was ambitious: assemble 3 prototypes for state trials by August and release 10 more tanks for troop testing in September. However, Soviet industry proved once again that plans on paper and reality in the workshops are 2 different things. The first machine was only assembled by mid-September, and the second was delivered even later. Production was drowning in defects and missed deadlines, while the main headache was an unreliable transmission that failed at the most inconvenient moments. Upon learning of the failure, Stalin did not stage a public reprimand, but his reaction was no less terrifying. In October 1949, a new decree was issued with extremely harsh deadlines. By mid-1950, the tanks had to pass all stages of testing, from factory trials to state evaluations. The plants worked at the limit of their capabilities, knowing they simply had no right to a second mistake. Factory trials began in strict accordance with the new deadlines, but technical issues persisted. From November 1949 to February 1950, 2 prototypes of Object 730 endured a true climatic hell. In the midst of brutal winter frosts, engineers tested the 700-horsepower V12.5 engines. The tanks were pushed relentlessly across snow-covered proving grounds, forced to overcome complex obstacles while every bolt was tested for durability. The results were highly contradictory. While the transmission and armament performed decently, the suspension failed regularly. The military complained about deafening noise, a cramped fighting compartment, and the impossibility of quick field repairs. Engineers made adjustments on the fly, and by spring, a new batch of machines was sent for trials in Turkestan. There, Under the scorching sun, the tanks were driven for hours along dusty roads to test the endurance of their mechanisms in extreme heat. In parallel with the mobility tests, a brutal survivability trial was staged at the Kubinka Proving Ground. The hull and turret of Object 730 were literally shot at point-blank range by the most powerful guns of the era. They used the 122mm D-25 gun, as well as captured German 88mm pack guns and Soviet ZIS-3 artillery. The ballistic test results impressed even the most skeptical generals. It was revealed that the hull strength of the new tank significantly exceeded that of the IS-3. It became clear, Soviet engineers had managed to create a machine capable of not just engaging in duels, but emerging victorious under a hail of enemy shells. Despite a long list of required improvements, the Commission gave the project the green light. For a long time, the new machine was prepared for production under the glorious name Joseph Stalin. After successful trials in 1952, the tank was officially recommended for service under the designation IS-5. However, the Soviet bureaucratic machine dragged out the process, and the index managed to change to IS-8. Everything changed in March 1953. Stalin's death put an end to the tradition of naming tanks after the leader. Amidst the burgeoning struggle against the cult of personality, the IS abbreviation became politically inconvenient. Ultimately, in December 1953, the Empire's last heavy tank was officially adopted under the modest and nondescript designation T-10. Symbolically, it was not only the 10th in the line of heavy machines, but also the final representative of its class. The design of the T-10 represented the pinnacle of the Soviet tank-building school of those years. Engineers utilized the famous pike nose, a complex shape for the upper frontal hull where nearly 5-inch armor plates were positioned at extreme angles. This provided a colossal chance for enemy shells to ricochet. The tank's turret was a single-cast piece with a streamlined shape and variable armor thickness, ranging from nearly 10 inches in the frontal section to practically invulnerable zones around the gun mantlet. Inside, everything was prioritized for combat effectiveness, even though the four-man crew had to endure incredible crampedness. The tank was low, sleek, and very difficult to detect or hit on the battlefield, making it a true steel ghost. The main armament of the T-10 was the powerful 122mm D-25TA gun. It was a formidable weapon capable of piercing almost any tank armor of that era at direct fire range. To ease the workload of the loader, engineers implemented an electromechanical rammer. This reduced reload time and brought the rate of fire up to 3 or 4 rounds per minute, an excellent result for such a large caliber. A 12.7mm DSHKT anti-aircraft machine gun was mounted on the turret roof. It was designed not only to combat infantry and light armored vehicles, but also to repel attacks from low-flying aircraft. The T-10 was ready to face the enemy on the ground and in the air, essentially becoming a rolling fortress. Despite its powerful gun, the base T-10 model had a serious flaw: the absence of a weapon stabilizer. In combat conditions, this meant the tank could only fire effectively from a stationary position or during brief stops. According to statistics from that era, the probability of hitting a target while moving was a measly 1 to 2%. In essence, the crew was simply wasting precious ammunition. This problem was solved in subsequent modifications. The T-10A was equipped with the Urigan single-axis stabilizer, and later, the T-10B received the Grom dual-axis stabilizer. The results of the modernization shocked the military. Firing accuracy on the move jumped to 60%. The tank stopped being a stationary firing point and transformed into a swift hunter capable of destroying targets at full speed. The T-10 was not a tank for rookie conscripts. It was a complex, expensive, and temperamental machine that required a delicate touch. In the Soviet Union, only one educational institution specifically trained officers for these heavyweights: the Ulyanovsk Guards Tank Command School. Getting accepted there was considered an incredible stroke of luck, and its graduates formed the true elite of the tank forces. Service on the T-10 involved immense physical strain. Due to the cramped fighting compartment and the specific nature of its mechanisms, crews were selected based on rigid criteria. There was a constant shortage of personnel. There were cases where heavy tank regiments were only 50% staffed. It was a closed club of professionals who knew the secrets of a machine the rest of the army could only guess at. The T-10 was shrouded in a veil of secrecy for decades. This was especially felt in the group of Soviet forces in Germany, where these tanks stood at the very edge of a potential conflict. The secrecy reached absurd levels. During exercises, crews often removed their rank insignia, and column movements were carried out primarily at night to hide the equipment from the eyes of Western intelligence. In fact, the detailed operating manual for the T-10 remained classified until 1974. Even the USSR's Warsaw Pact allies had no access to this machine. The T-10 was never exported or handed over to friendly regimes. The entire fleet of these steel giants remained under Moscow's direct control, ready at any moment to become the crushing fist that would break through the West's defenses. Despite its status as the primary boogeyman for Western generals, the T-10 had almost no real combat experience. The only time the world saw this beast in action was in August 1968 during Operation Danube. Heavy tanks clattered across the pavement of Prague, serving as a vivid demonstration of Soviet power and the resolve to suppress the Prague Spring. It was psychological warfare in its purest form. The menacing appearance of the low-profile machines with their massive guns had a sobering effect on protesters. The T-10 fulfilled its mission without firing a single shot at an enemy tank. After Czechoslovakia, individual battalions of these machines continued to guard state borders until the late 70s, remaining an invisible but weighty argument in the great geopolitical game. By the mid-80s, the era of the heavy tank had finally set. Main battle tanks took center stage, being faster, more accurate, and equal to the veterans in protection. The T-10 began to be gradually withdrawn from the group of forces in Germany and sent to storage bases in Belarus and Ukraine. There, under layers of cosmoline, thousands of steel monsters froze in anticipation of a great war that, fortunately, never began. Mass decommissioning and scrapping started in the late 80s. The official final chapter in the history of the last steel emperor was written only on September 23, 1997, by a decree of the Russian president. The T-10 retired after more than 40 years of service, remembered as the pinnacle of Soviet heavy armor, a machine that won its war simply by being present on the battlefield.